Welcome back to today's video. Today is Wednesday, August 16th, 2023, and today we are going to be talking about the state of Texas and the 2024 United States Senate election, talking about Representative Colin Allred, talking about incumbent Senator Ted Cruz, talking about the state of Texas in totality, and how it serves to be as the only pickup opportunity for Democrats in the upcoming 2024 Senate races. Now, on your screen right now are all of the races that we deem to be competitive in 2024. 9 yellow states on the map here that are swing states for either side of the aisle. And 8 out of 9 of these states are Democratic held, ranging from Montana to West Virginia to Arizona to Pennsylvania. But one major landmass that strikes out as an interesting state for consideration in 2024 is the state of Texas, with an incumbent Republican, Senator Ted Cruz. Now, Ted Cruz ran for president back in 2016. A lot of us know him for that, but in 2018, he had a very close Senate race between then Representative Beto O'Rourke and himself, in which the race was decided by just single digits, decided down by 3 percentage points in one of the previously more red states in the United States. Now, 2 years prior to this election, we do have to recognize that Donald Trump did win the state by single digits. He won it by 9 percentage points against Hillary Clinton. But for 2 years later, for an incumbent Republican who was not super unpopular, to perform at a point where he was just winning by less than 3 percentage points against a no-name Democrat was showing us exactly the reality of Texas as a state that is rapidly diversifying and rapidly growing in favor of the Democratic Party. Over the past 3 election cycles on the presidential level, there has been an average swing of 5.1% in favor of the Democratic Party, election to election to election. In 2012, it went to Mitt Romney by 15.8%. In 2016, went to Donald Trump by 9%. And then in 2020, also went to Donald Trump by 5.6%. On average here, you're seeing a considerable shift. And what you find is that if that shift holds up into 2024, Donald Trump is on track for just a 0.5% victory. That's where you start to see this Senate race come into consideration. We're also going to be talking about more in this video about the Republicans and Democrats that are, talking about this race in an analytical sense, where Republicans think they have an opportunity to actually do better than Donald Trump did in the last election, and why also Democrats are quite hopeful with their frontrunner right now, Representative Colin Allred, who played football for Baylor, went on to serve in the United States Congress in 2018, also played for the Tennessee Titans in the NFL. A very, very interesting candidate, a very different style of candidate than Texas Democrats have ever ran before, and it might actually work. Now, I will preface this video by saying that I believe Texas is still a red state. I don't think Joe Biden's winning it in 2024, and I certainly don't think the Senate race is going to go to the Democratic Party, at least easily. I think there's always a chance. I think given that the state of Texas, again, as I've mentioned, has been rapidly diversifying, has gotten narrower in the last election, there's always a possibility that Democrats do end up in this upset victory, but it would take a lot more than just simple shifts. But for the Senate race, surprisingly enough, I think the Democratic Party has, a reasonable shot here, even though in many other Senate races in 2024, they simply do not. We've already written off the possibility of Republicans losing the states of Indiana and North Dakota and Missouri, which come into a point of interest because in 2018, they actually had Democratic senators. So these were states that were being defended by the Democratic Party. They were all decided by single digits with the exception of North Dakota. Tennessee became a competitive state. Mississippi was decided by 6 points. So all around, the races were a lot more competitive than they are today currently. Another notable absence from the swing state column is the state of Florida, which was decided in 2018 by 0.2%. So for a race that went from 0.2% now being a Republican stronghold, you have to understand why. A lot of it has to do with the influx of Republicans in the state following the COVID-19 pandemic, an influx of support for the GOP in the Hispanic regions across the state, Miami-Dade, Broward County, areas the Democrats have seen consistent losses, specifically also in the 2022 midterms when Ron DeSantis flipped Miami-Dade and won the state by 20 percentage points in what used to be a battleground state. Texas will probably vote to the left of Florida in the presidential election in 2024, which is fascinating to think about here. But, looking at the Senate race, I think you are seeing, at least starting to see, a very good set of combination of factors for the Democratic Party when you're looking at candidate favorability, when you're looking at past elections, when you're looking, again, at Representative Colin Allred, who I will get to in just a moment. And you're also just looking ahead to what we can expect for 2024 on the top of the ticket, the presidential level. Now, 2018 was a bit different. It was a midterm election year that will come into consideration, and we will talk about that later down the line. But 2024 is going to be a presidential election. And what we are looking for here are candidates who know how to win alongside presidential elections. In 2018, that was the last time that you saw Ted Cruz up for an election. Actually, I'm sort of showing you what I want to bring to you in just a moment. But in 2012, Ted Cruz won by around 16 points across the state, 15, 16 points across this state. You find that 6 years later, he's winning by 3. But 2024 should be quite interesting because Colin Allred, as incumbent U.S. representative from Texas's 32nd district, already starts out as a strong candidate. He's raised millions of dollars, starting out with a primary lead, and again brings this unique perspective to the candidate platform the Democrats really haven't seen on their side. The most comparable, and not for the benefit of Colin Allred, but the most comparable person that I can think of in this situation is Herschel Walker, who ran for Senate back in 2022 in the state of Georgia. He ultimately ended up losing by roughly 3 points across the state, but he came into politics as a football player, someone who played for the Georgia Bulldogs, became a member of the Hall of Fame within the state, became very well recognized across for his endeavors within the sport of football. But Colin Allred is a bit different. Number one, he's not as extreme. I think that he is a more moderate, more center-focused type of candidate, or at least that's the perception around him. Even if he doesn't necessarily vote that way, that's the way people view him. On top of that, he has been in Congress since 2018, which also is a very important thing to note because he knows how to win elections. Colin Allred, as a candidate, won in a red district, a red enough district that what you already saw here, which was a 5-point victory, 7-point victory for Colin Allred, actually was a huge upset. Texas's 32nd district was so Republican that in 2014, it voted for Pete Sessions by nearly 30 points. 2 years later, Democrats didn't even run a candidate because of how Republican they thought this district was, because of how gerrymandered it was, and how strong of a candidate Pete Sessions ultimately was. You found out that Colin Allred, who ended up winning the race as a civil rights attorney, former NFL player, blew him out. 7 points in this district that Republicans won with 71% of the vote in the last race. Think about that. A Republican PVI of Republican plus 5. Democrats didn't even run a candidate the election 2 years prior. Then they went on to flip it. I talked about this too. Being able to win in a presidential election year is also very important. 2 years later, Colin Allred, despite many notable Democratic losses across the United States, 15 losses for Democrats in these battleground districts, some of them less competitive than this one that ended up switching to the GOP. You see that in 2020, Colin Allred also won by roughly 7 points as well, 6 points across the state. A very strong victory for the incumbent U.S. representative. Since then, he's been redistricted into a safer district. There's no concern here that the Democrats will lose the newly drawn district for Colin Allred in 2024. But what we will take away from this is that he does know how to win alongside a presidential ballot where you have a top ticket candidate outrunning down ballot Republicans, and he knows how to flip districts from red to blue, which means he can potentially do it on the Senate level. Now, it isn't just the fact that Colin Allred, at least in my own declaration, I see him as a strong candidate. It also counts down to the fact that election history, as I've already mentioned, is not in favor of the Republican Party. We already mentioned the 5.1% swing on average. That should bring us roughly to around a Trump 1-point victory in 2024, assuming that we are in for a rematch election. But the telling signs didn't just happen on the presidential level. It didn't just happen with Beto O'Rourke's significantly strong performance in 2018. You also can see it on the governor level in 2022 when Greg Abbott defeated Beto O'Rourke. Yeah, he ran again in 2022 for governor this time, but with a significantly less strong campaign, less money, less enthusiasm, and a comment that has haunted him since 2019. Beto O'Rourke said, "Hell yes, we are going to take your AR-15s." And what we found here was that Beto O'Rourke ended up performing, still pretty well compared to the past, but it was more so an underperformance of Greg Abbott. Beto O'Rourke's politics in the state of Texas don't seem to have a super strong future, at least in the immediate. Texas very well could become a bluer state, and then he could run for office. He's not super, old. He definitely has time to run for office, maybe return to the House of Representatives. But pulling away from that point, Greg Abbott ended up winning here by 11.5%. Now, it may seem, strong, given that Greg Abbott is a Republican running in a state that Donald Trump only won by 5.6%, but we have to keep his races in context, right? In 2014, Greg Abbott won his race by 17 percentage points. In 2018, he won by 13.3%, and this victory was very impressive. In 2018, Greg Abbott outran Senator Ted Cruz by 11 points. He defeated the Democrat here by 13.3% in the environment where the Democrats were winning nationally by 8 percentage points. Donald Trump had just won the state by 9 points. So for it to go from Trump plus 9, Democrat plus 8 nationally, Beto O'Rourke losing by 3, Ted Cruz underperforming by 10, and Greg Abbott here is winning by 13.3, showed the strength of Greg Abbott as a candidate. He was very strong for the state of Texas. He met the moment. He did well. But then came 2022. I don't think he particularly did well. And I don't say that to, sort of go after him as a candidate or go after him as a Republican, governor. I say this to say that given the national environment shifting 10 points to the right from 2018 to 2022, his margin should have improved. His margin should have absolutely improved. And, this isn't everything, right? This is just in conjunction with the shift on the presidential level, the shift on the Senate level, the shift on the governor level, and everything is telling us there's warning signs here that Republicans are losing support in the state of Texas. And that's where I think you start to see why Democrats are somewhat hopeful about the 2024 Senate race in the state of Texas, given the electoral history, given the popularity, and given the enthusiasm around Colin Allred, and also just his strength as a candidate altogether. And another point that I would mention before we get into a lot of reasons why we can also think the Republicans will still very much fend off this seat is the approval rating of Senator Ted Cruz. The University of Texas at Austin does this very routine poll. They do it every few months, sort of on a quarter system, where they ask voters how they view certain candidates, certain elected officials, whether that's President Biden or Governor Abbott or that Senator Cruz. In this case, they've been tracking it since the moment he stepped into office. October 2015 was the first time they took a major poll surrounding Senator Ted Cruz's job. Now, in recent data, it has been back and forth. There's always been this neck and neck difference between them, but that's not good news for Senator Ted Cruz. As a Republican in a red state, you should be approved of, and his approval was a main factor in 2018. A warning sign that I would say for Senator Ted Cruz is that when he almost lost his Senate race back in 2018, he had an approval rating of 47%, according to the University of Texas, with a disapproval rating of 42%. Where is he today? 45 to 42. In fact, a 2-point decrease from his approval rating back in 2018. Voters feel less confident about him now than they did then. Just so happens to be his margin of victory, 3 percentage points. Now, I'm not here to argue that the approval rating is the end-all be-all. I don't think that's fair, and I've never thought that was fair. We've seen times where candidates are disapproved of and end up winning in large margins because these states are hyperpolarized. There are plenty of Republicans out here who I'm sure are saying that they don't necessarily approve of the job that Senator Ted Cruz is doing, but in no situation would they vote for a Democrat over him. And after Beto O'Rourke, I think a lot of Republicans, in some ways, see themselves as burned by a candidate they were very hopeful in back in 2018 that maybe could have been a more moderate, more center approach to Senator Ted Cruz's job that ended up being somebody who was, in their eyes, anti-Second Amendment. That could be the case with Representative Colin Allred. Now, I don't think that's going to be the reality. I think you will see some comparisons made, but not too many. But Senator Ted Cruz comes into this, I think, a bit stronger than he did in 2018. One major factor, 2024 is a presidential election year, which just so happens to benefit Senator Ted Cruz. If Donald Trump's winning the state, so is he. We've seen consistently that down-ballot Republicans almost always outperform President Donald Trump. We also have to recognize that incumbency is a factor, always something that helps. In some cases, it did hurt Ted Cruz, but in this case, I think it will ultimately be a major factor for voters. If they're happy with the way things are right now, they might want to go ahead and maintain it. Or if they believe that Joe Biden's on track to win re-election, they may want Senator Ted Cruz to serve as this consistent reminder that there will be a checks and balance. We saw it happen in 2016 when there were voters, people who answered in focus groups that said, I voted for the Republican on the Senate ticket because I believed that Hillary Clinton was going to be president. I thought it was better to have a Republican Senate and a Republican House if Hillary Clinton was already going to win the presidency. Now, I don't think that's going to be the deciding factor, but I think it'll be important. And, keeping in mind that 2018 was also a blue wave year, 2024 will be a lot more even. And also Ted Cruz is now this loyal to Trump figure. Back in 2018, he was still beating the allegations that he was anti-Trump, a never-Trumper, because for a while he was. He was the runner-up in the 2016 nomination and wasn't super enthusiastic about him until, guess what? He ended up winning. Now he doesn't really have to face any of that as he's been a very steadfast supporter of the president or the former president of the United States. Altogether, I think these factors come into play that counteract a lot of the negatives that we have seen, a lot of the positives in some cases for the Democrats. The 2024 Senate race in Texas will be quite interesting. If I was to rate it initially, I would say that I agree with the pundits that Texas is a likely red state at this point in time. But if there's one state that I think draws a direct comparison to how we've seen Texas change over time, it's surprisingly enough the state of Arizona, which in 2012 went to Mitt Romney by 10 points, in 2016 went to Donald Trump by 3.5, then by the next election had flipped to the Democrats for the first time since 1996. For Texas, it would be for the first time since 1976. And then guess what happens in the 2022 governor's race, in a race that everyone thinks the Republican's going to win? People think the Democrat is weak here. They think the Republicans are going to hold out strong. They have a popular Republican governor. Doug Ducey won by 14 points in the last election. The shift in the state was too much for the Republicans to overcome. Katie Hobbs, the Secretary of State at the time, now serving as governor, won her race by less than a percentage point. But as we get closer and closer to 2024, it becomes a lot clearer that Arizona is shifting towards the left. In a very similar fashion also to Georgia, that we see Texas, Georgia, Arizona, Sun Belt states, minority growing states, population centers in Dallas, Austin, Houston, right? For Arizona, Maricopa County, it's Phoenix, it's Tucson. You take a look at, Georgia, you see the Atlanta metro area, you see Savannah, you see population growths in these states, minority population growth that is benefiting the Democratic Party electorally, and you are seeing that these shifts are pretty consistent. They are pretty much trend or election after election after election, and right now Texas seems to be just one election behind Arizona and Georgia, which just so happen to have two Democratic senators. So I'm not saying, Texas is going to have two Democratic senators after this election, but what I am saying is that a lot of these comparisons are very similar, because a very similar thing is happening in Texas that happened in Arizona, that is happening in Georgia, that is happening in these Sun Belt region states where Democrats are starting to advance. There is equal arguments on both sides of the aisle to say that Ted Cruz is in a good position, that Colin Howard is in a good position. The general convention, the general wisdom here is that Democrats are going to lose this race by a likely margin. I think it narrows up. I think it certainly narrows up, and I think Ted Cruz is in for a victory no larger than 6 to 7 points. And that's only because he's running alongside former President Trump, and I think there's a good chance that if Donald Trump does end up being, found guilty of these, accusations of these crimes that he's being accused of the indictments actually serving a purpose, if Donald Trump ends up being a nominee from a jail cell, which seems extreme, but 2 months ago I would have said there's no reality. Today I think there's not a good chance, but somewhat of a chance, right? Our political system, our perception on reality, our perception on this upcoming election is changing rapidly as these indictments strike down, as the American public begins to adapt and shift as a result of the indictments. And there's some reality out there that Texas flips blue in 2024 because of all the drama around President Trump. I don't think it's this one. I don't think it's the likeliest outcome, but I wouldn't count out Democrats in Texas just yet. And I certainly think it will be a lot closer, which, as we have seen in Georgia and Arizona, moral victories aren't actual victories, but eventually they lead to them. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2024 Senate election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.